Hi everyone, Angela here. I'm going to show you how to sew a flat felt seam on a straight seam and also on two curved seams. Now in this video, I'm assuming that you've cut out your pattern pieces and you have 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters as your seam allowance. Place wrong sides together, and I'm just drawing out the seam allowance so you can see. I'm using the Juki TL-2010Q sewing machine. The link for this and the tools I use are down in the description below. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, click the link for Echidna Sewing and Juki Junkies for North America. On the throat plate, there is a 5/8 of an inch guideline. Stitch the entire seam, and I'm not going to back tack for these samples. Also make sure that the thread tension isn't too tight. I do have another video to sew a true flat felt seam, and you can find that here. For this seam, you just need to decide if you want the folded edge facing that way or facing this way. For this sample, I'll do it this way. To reduce bulk, we need to trim down the side that's going to be underneath. We'll trim away just a little bit more than half of the seam. Now, I don't recommend opening up the seam and trying to fold it under. It's very hard to get it even. Instead, do it this way. Have the seam facing you and turn off the steam function on your iron so you don't burn yourself. Fold the seam up so that the edge is just under the stitch line and press across. Do this as evenly as possible for the best result. Now, by trimming away a little bit more than half of that first seam, you can easily fold over the other seam. Next, if you want, open up, pull taut, and press the seam flat. You can skip this step and just pull the seam taut while you're edge stitching. To edge stitch, I have the fold just past the inside of the foot. This is even easier if you have a presser foot with an edge guide on it. Keep the stitching nice and even and parallel with the first stitch line. The result is a seam that's a bit stronger and it's nice and flat on both sides. This finish is great if you don't have a serger or overlocker, or if you have sensitive skin so that you don't feel a rough seam on the inside. For a curved seam that's concave, put wrong sides together and again stitch with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Here's a little tip. When sewing curves, instead of concentrating on the area in front of the presser foot, focus on the edge that's right across from the needle. This time, I'm going to trim the seam allowance from the top. Again, trim away just a little bit more than half of it. Fold up the bottom edge just below the stitch line. Again, keep it nice and even and press across. Now open up where the curviest part is and cut little notches just halfway into the seam, about every 1/4 inch. Make sure not to cut too close to the fold. Within that same section, cut notches into the narrower seam. Now when this seam gets folded over, it'll be able to spread out on the inside so there won't be any puckering. When sewing this folded edge down, pull the fabric taut and just sew a little bit at a time to keep everything flat. Give it a good press if you need to, and there shouldn't be any puckering or pleats on either side. For a convex curve, again, start with wrong sides together and sew with a 5/8 of an inch seam. Trim the seam and fold up the other. This time the outer curve is going to be wider than the inner curves. When you fold up that edge, try to ease it in to make it smaller as you press. When you fold that seam over, you can see that it's wavy and a lot wider. Pull the seam taut and pin in a few places to spread out that extra fabric evenly. You don't have to do this pinning, but it's worth taking a few seconds to do this to prevent any twisting. When edge stitching, hold on to the fabric from both sides to keep the seam flat. Sew a little bit at a time and use a sharp tool such as an awl or a point turner to help you ease in the fabric. You want to carefully push the fabric down so that you're not creating any pleats or twisting. This curve is a little trickier to do because you're pulling from the sides and you're pushing in from the center. Give the seam a good press and use a ham if you have one. Again, there shouldn't be any pleating or puckering on either side. Make sure to check out some of my other videos. Thanks again for watching. Take care and happy sewing.